Oh, Kazao said, dropping the huge bundle immediately. Uncle, this is terribly heavy. Of course, it's full of books. I was finally able to get a lot of studying done. He scratched his side vigorously as he said this. Do you have a towel? His wife Ikui handed him a towel, and as she was about to sit down beside him, he jokingly warned her, don't get too close or you'll get a souvenir. A souvenir? Lace, my blood relations. They are quite really cute. The rest of the party burst out laughing as Ikui jumped aside horrified. He breathed deeply as he wiped his perspiring forehead and neck with the towel. It was the pure air of freedom outside the prison and its fetters, and he took his fill of its sweetness. After 2 years, how wonderful it was! The cool night breeze caressed his cheek. People hurried along the street, not stopping even for an instant, ignoring the 4 people resting in the darkness. The night sky seemed to spread out endlessly. There was not a star to be seen. The heavens were dark. However, he was conscious of a great light shining in his heart, a light which no one else could see, and one whose presence he had no way of communicating. It was a flame which had been kindled in the bleakness of his solitary cell, one which could never be extinguished. It was a light which would never flicker in the wind of this corrupt world. He was sure and he was content. This is awful, he exclaimed, getting to his feet and driving off the hordes of mosquitoes that swarmed around his body. Let's go. The 4 began to walk slowly towards the Nakano station. The lights were dim in both the station and the train. All the men, as if by arrangement, were wearing gaiters and field service caps, and some had air raid hoods or even steel helmets hanging from their shoulders. The women, although few in number, all wore baggy peasant trousers and carried air raid hoods. Suddenly, this man in a light kimono appeared in their midst. He was immediately the object of suspicious and hostile glances. His unlined cotton kimono, a common summer garment, seemed quite extraordinary in this setting, although it was in fact the extraordinary nature of wartime that made it seem so. Without realizing that it was they who were different in their mental and spiritual state, they glared at the gaunt intruder with faces which seemed to say, "Traitor." Josei Toda did not mind this atmosphere in the least. He was a vital leader, always on the side of the people, wherever he might be, in train or on the street. People are strong like weeds. Where no weeds grow, trees, flower, and fruits do not flourish either. The people's might is at times more powerful and their thoughts truer than those of philosophers or statesmen. Soon he was absorbed in the conversation with the passenger seated next to him, an energetic-looking man in his 50s, who held a battered pot and wash basin tenderly on his lap as if they were treasures. he was giving a vivid account of the great fire following an air raid one night in May. It was hellfire. By dawn, there was nothing but a field of devastation, with only air raid shelters standing here and there. Ours was strong enough to withstand the raid, and now the four of us have only that shelter to live in. Hearing this tale, Toda could not help recalling the disastrous Kanto earthquake of 1923, just 3 years after he had come to Tokyo from Hokkaido. The center of Tokyo had continued to burn for over 2 days. At that time, a single blanket, a lone piece of radish were worth a king's ransom. He had been a youth of only 24. He asked his neighbor, "Was it anything like that fire?" No, there is no comparison. It was like 3 times bigger and 5 times more terrible than the earthquake. But where were you? He faltered. He could not say that he had been in Toyotama prison. I was out near Ome Boulevard. I see, the passenger replied. My house was destroyed in the earthquake too. This is the second time for me. To be burnt out twice in one's life, it's just too much. The first time it was the earthquake, and you couldn't really be angry about that. This time, it's the Yanks. When you think of it, it's all irritating, foolish, and upsetting. Don't you agree? Just what does the government intend to do about it? It's just like a quarrel between adults and children, really. Choking on his words, the man suddenly looked about him in terror. Toda tried to continue the conversation, but his neighbor replied only in brusque monosyllables. Obviously, he was terrified of the police, or Kempetai. When they arrived at Shinjuku station, Toda's group transferred to the Yamate train. He talked to anyone near him. They had a strange impression at first of this man in an unlined summer kimono, but disarmed by his friendly way of speaking, they soon relaxed and told him in great detail about the war damage. As the train pulled into Harajuku station, the passengers as a group rose to their feet and bowed in deepest reverence towards the right of the train. Toda peered out of the window but could see nothing but a thickly wooded stretch. It was only when they neared Shibuya station that he realized it had been the inner garden of the Meiji shrine. He muttered to himself, "Religious ignorance destroys the nation. Nichiren Daishonin taught that Buddhist gods will not hear false prayers. Without true Buddhism, Japan cannot receive the protection of the Buddhist gods." President Makiguchi held faith in true Buddhism and died in the prison under the military government. Suddenly, his expression changed and he became a prey to anxiety. He stopped speaking and looked out over the burnt fields, stretching out in the darkness as far as the eye could see. In that darkness, people were crawling in terror and despair, oppressed by hardship. He was thinking of those unhappy people who were forced to endure all life's woes. Today, everyone in Japan knows of Josei Toda, the great leader of the people. However, in those days, few knew him. Even where he was known, it was only to the authorities concerned, since he was accused of offences against the Public Security Preservation Law or blasphemy law. These laws were meant to suppress the shakabuku activities of the pre-war Soka Gakkai. The Public Security Preservation Law was abolished on the late General Douglas MacArthur's orders immediately after the war, and many political and religious criminals were set free. There has not been a single case where its abolition has jeopardized the security of the nation. This clearly shows that it was right to repeal a law originally intended for the suppression of communism. In the end, it merely netted the government a host of innocent prisoners. The law often plunged the innocent into profound despair. The number of guiltless who became its victims is beyond imagination. Towards the end of the war, it became a repressive law for the support of the military government. We must therefore appraise the spirit of any law, remembering that a measure that supports a mere handful of people is unreasonable and can cause sorrow and misery to many others. Although freedom of religion was guaranteed by the Constitution, President Tsunesaburo Makiguchi died in gaol at the hands of that ill-famed law. Makiguchi's death was in flagrant contradiction to its spirit. There are often more villains living outside prison walls than inside them. And so, a man concerned about the future of his native land, who worked for the sake of the people, was confined to a prison cell. Others who lived in idleness, betrayed their nation, and assisted in degrading society went free. It was, in truth, an absurd way of distinguishing good from evil, truth from falsehood. Who is qualified to judge people? Without establishing some great and immutable law, it is impossible. Fair and proper justice cannot be administered without a basic principle. General Director Josei Toda was released after about 2 years' imprisonment. He was on the verge of starvation. Further, all that he had previously built up had collapsed by the time he was released from the prison. Toda was well known among the younger generation under the name of Josei Toda, author of an examination reference book titled Mathematics Through Reasoning Guidance. The book, as it was very original, sold over 1 million copies at the time. There are perhaps millions of people who in childhood enjoyed the delight of passing examinations with its help. People now in their 40s must remember Toda's book with nostalgia.